we're all doing our best. Most people aren't just thinking, well, screw this, I'm just going to let it all hang out and my team can take the brunt of it. I can think of times when I've really tried hard to manage my stress. And yet I know it would have been leaking or coming out in a way which meant that even if I was trying to have a one-to-one with somebody, I knew my mind was still spinning because I had all these things to do. And to be able to pause and even pay attention to somebody in that moment it really felt overwhelming. And I'm sure maybe body language, maybe my leg was like bouncing up and down under the table, or where normally I could have asked the question that was a bit more relaxed, like what else is happening.
Welcome to Leadership Rewired. Allison Allen and Dean Martin invite you to join them for an honest conversation that brings a personal perspective to the issues of leadership.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Leadership Rewired. This is part 2 of a series today of Leading Minds, where Allison and I have spoken about harnessing the power of the brain for exceptional leadership. And in this series, it's just been so good to explore the things we know about leadership, but really thinking about it from the cognitive and emotional processes that are actually happening. So last week, you'll remember we looked at episode 1, which was leadership in the mirror, talking about multi-rater or 360 feedbacks and unlocking growth through self-assessments. Today, leading with calm, understanding stress. And then the third one in this series that's coming up, which is about leadership and ADHD, how you as a leader can thrive with ADHD in a leadership role.
So let's open this up. I think, we want to answer this question around, how stress might be sabotaging your leadership, right? We want to talk about that in a much more thoughtful way. And I think the reason why this topic is so important is because stress is everywhere. I think everyone is feeling stress at work, stress at home, stress socially, politically. I think the world feels a little bit on fire, and that comes down to the leader, and the leader has to, again, as we say often on this podcast, get the best out of people. So we just want to talk about it through that lens. And so by the end of this episode, what we're hoping you're going to do, or at least get from it, is some understanding about how stress impacts the way you lead, how you might identify if you're under stress. So because sometimes we don't necessarily know that we're actually under stress, and we are. And hopefully you'll walk away with some tools that will give you the opportunity to say, okay, I feel under stress, or I know I'm under stress. Let me try these things, because again, my job as leader is to get the best out of people. Yeah. Let's talk about the consequences of ignoring stress, Dean.
Yeah. Well, I don't think anybody particularly enjoys stress, but to start us off, to think about what are the consequences? What happens when we ignore stress? That's why we want to talk about, might you be experiencing it to a point that it's actually damaging for you, your team, your body? Allison, have you experienced something like this? Maybe it's a silly question, but
no, something like that. No, not at all. I think, let me use myself. When you are leading, it could be one person or 300 people. If you have, I often talk to leaders about, okay, here's you in the middle. You've got your own leader who's giving you direction. You've got peers who are influencing the way that you lead. You've got clients that you are responsible for. And no matter what people say, everybody has a client. HR has a client, finance has a client, operations has a client, the mail person has a client. So every person has a client. So you've got your leader, you've got your peers, you've got your clients, and then you've got your directs. And then you've probably got a whole host of other stakeholders that are draining your energy, right? And so sometimes what happens with you and you're managing stress, and I've been in this situation myself, the place in which that stress is often felt is on your team. Because you don't feel like you can demonstrate it to your leader. You don't feel like you can show your peers that you can't win. You don't want to impact your client. So the place in which you feel that you can sometimes let go is actually on your team. And that's probably the worst place. for it to happen. Because again, those are the folks that are looking at you, that want to model the way that you work, want to be you someday, want to learn from you. And they're the ones that are sort of listening to your direction. So we have to figure out a way to give people what we need, but in some respects, really, really impact our team in a very positive way. So I've seen it erode trust. I've seen leaders yell at people and call people out for things. I've seen people give feedback in front of the team because they don't have time to give feedback to one-on-one. I've seen it do really, really horrible things. Earlier in my career, I can note a specific example of when I actually did something like that, where I gave somebody some feedback across the table. There's like 20-something people in a room. And rightly so, I was written up for that because the person felt like they were targeted. They felt like they were being called out. And rightly so, it should have been felt that way, because after I did it, I felt like shit. I felt like, how did I do something like that? It wasn't right. It wasn't fair. And I had to apologize. And it took me a long time, interestingly enough, to rebuild my relationship with that person. But actually, it took longer to rebuild with team because they saw that. They didn't feel safe. They saw that moment. So it was very early in my career. So when you don't manage it, and you have to manage it, and we talk about it all the time on this podcast, because the way you show up to your team impacts the way that they work and how they feel about being in the organization. What about you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm interested in what you shared about that example. In a big room, I can think of times when I think, even if I was aware of the fact that I was under stress, I think we're all doing our best. Most people aren't just thinking, well, screw this, I'm just going to let it all hang out and my team can take the brunt of it. I think most people are trying hard. I can think of times when I've really tried hard to manage my stress. And yet I know it would have been leaking or coming out in a way which meant that even if I was trying to have a one-to-one with somebody, I knew my mind was still spinning because I had all these things to do, or I was worried about my position in the team, or I was worried about what my manager was giving to me. And to be able to pause and even pay attention to somebody in that moment really felt overwhelming. And I'm sure, I don't know, maybe body language, maybe my leg was like bouncing up and down under the table, or where normally I could have asked the question that was a bit more relaxed, like, what else is happening? Tell me more. It's just like, okay, fine. Yes. Okay, thank you. Great. Bang, bang, bang. So, and that doesn't feel nice. And then you can actually see those behaviors. It's like that ripple effect impacting negatively on people.
Right.
And some of those indicators, I would say, is even your team. I can think of a time when there would be a shift in the extent to which they would actually come up to me or even just chat about something casual or come with an idea or whatever. It's like suddenly I couldn't get hold of them anymore. They were still there, but it just felt there was a distance. So I hear what you say. It's a silent eroder, I think, of trust, even if you're not a badly behaved, stressful person. We're not talking about throwing your keyboard out the window or swearing at people. We're just talking about doing your best, but it's still there in your body and it's impacting. Yeah.
Why do you think stress hijacks our thinking and our emotions? Like, why does it sort of, because I think about, again, me in that example, that's not who I am. I don't like try to bully people and, try to yell at people across the room. Why do you think it hijacks our emotions and our thinking and how we show up?
Yeah. Well, I think something happens in our brain, and this is our series is about what's happening in the brain here. So maybe it would be worth even looking at what are quite simply a couple of parts and pieces of our brain. How do we perceive what's going on around us? How do we perceive or even interpret reality? And then what's happening in the brain that actually floods us with feel-good hormones or makes us feel calm or makes us pay attention or makes us freak out? think there's something really at a brain level.
Yep.
Do you want to you want to tell us a little bit? I think, did you say the word something about the amygdala or whatever? Can I?
Well, I think I know what typically happens in stress situations, right? So you have, my own coach was talking to me about this the other day. When I think when we feel like something's coming at us, that's either in our control or not, but something that's coming at us. Yeah. There is a natural sort of fight or flight response.
Yes.
And, and sometimes, most of us, because of the roles that we're in or because of the kinds of teams that we have, we feel like we have to stay in that moment. And it kind of feels like fight, right? Defend our position on something, defend the work, call someone out or make someone else responsible because we are fighting, or at least we feel that we're fighting for whatever the moment is or whatever the action is. And so that whatever that stressor is, it comes in and we immediately swing to a place. Some of us flight, and we just want to get out of there, and we just want to not deal with it. We tend to shut down. We go to what is often described as a quiet place. Whatever the case may be, we do that because we think that's a way of, again, managing that thing that we really just don't want to deal with. And it's affronting. So I think it's a perceived threat to our bodies, and our body has this sort of, they call it amygdala hijack, but I think that word is really overly complicated and sometimes it scares people. And I used to see visuals in our leadership classes over it, and I was like, why are we showing people this? But anyway, the point is that think about it as some stressor comes at you, whatever that stressor is. I don't want to name a stress because I think stresses for people show up differently. Something that may stress the hell out of me may not stress Dean at all. And that's because of how I was raised and how I was brought up and the things that I was taught as I growed up and how I've even been dealt with in my career. Right. Mm-hmm. And so we all have different stressors that come at us, but our response is either, again, fight or flight in the sense that we are perceiving a threat and we feel like we need to do something. I'll give you a really good example. Like for me, a really good quick story. When I was growing up, I wanted to get credit cards, and my mom gave me her financial advice, which was to just apply for every time you see a credit card application. And at that time, it's not like it is now where you can go online and do everything. You got a piece of paper, you went in a bank, you filled it out, you mailed it in, and you'll get credit cards. So I got all this credit card, no financial coaching at all. But anyway, I got all these credit cards and I'm spending money. Anyway, long story short, I end up with like bill collectors calling me all the time. Like I got to pay I'm getting all these notices, like no control. Anyway, very quickly I learned, pay off your bills. I went through the whole journey of getting my credit, super, 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 super great. I'm very happy with my credit. But anyway, why am I telling you this story? Today, when a bill collector calls me I feel in my body like, oh my God, oh, what in the world? Why are you calling me? And I know I've paid my bill, or I know that I've, or like if sometimes how when you're shopping and you get declined, and they're just like, the card's not going through, and you're like, what? I know why the bank is doing it, but for me, I'm like, decline. So in my body, I feel like I've got to defend myself and my credibility. So it's a natural thing that happens. I know that's a small story, but it's like big things, little things, whatever they are, they hit us all differently. And it's a natural reaction to either fight or flight. And the question is the objective is to realize when you're doing it and then figure out a way to get yourself back to calm. Any other thoughts there? Those sorts of stories resonate with me. And I think it's also really right that you've said, let's not name a stressor, because we all have different things that would concern us. Somebody else might be like, I'm not worried about financial stuff. But within a work environment,
I think typically the sorts of things that many of us share would be any kind of perception as a threat to our status, like do we, we lost face in front of our manager or somebody's called us out, it looks like we've done something stupid, or a concern around certainty, what's going to happen, an email got sent, am I going to get promoted, or is this the meeting where I'm going to get fired? And or any kind of a perceived risk around, are my relationships being damaged? Is that person who works in compliance no longer rate me as a good worker, or they don't like me, somebody didn't say hi? So around relationships as well, or perceptions of fairness. And you use the word sort of swinging. There's something that happens in our brain there that actually, whether we want to look at the pictures of the brain or not, it is actually happening physically, that a part of us, because of that perceived threat, our executive functioning part of the brain, the part that allows us to plan and be organized and think and be rational and creative, gets bypassed.
Yes.
And the functioning that then takes over has an evolutionary function in that it's there for our survival. So it was helpful, back in the day, a bazillion years ago, when we quickly looked and thought, oh, that looks like a snake, and jumped out the way, because our survival was dependent on that. And then we could look back and go, oh, that was just the stick on the ground. So that part of the brain, when we're in that fight or flight, it's pretty good for some things. It's efficient and it's quick. And it does very sort of rudimentary pattern recognition, but it's not very accurate. So that's where we're in a meeting and somebody folds their arms, and immediately something may happen in my brain that I go into that part of like, right, he doesn't like me, or he's going to complain, and we've bashed, the logical part of me, which is, tell buddy, he just crossed his arms, is no longer there. And now I'm already thinking, oh, this reminds me of times when people have been dissatisfied and nothing good comes of that. And then I'm going to be called into HR and then the team, and we go down a whole long, terrible journey, and we're rational and we end up saying something in a meeting that's unhelpful. So you're right there, for us to realize in those moments when we're feeling like there's a bigger than normal reaction, or we even feel it physiologically. Often, I remember when I was leading leadership development programs with people, I would ask them to think about, when we feel this moment of whether we even knew it as fight or flight, where do you feel it in your body first? And it actually is happening in your body because of what's happening in the brain. The brain is now flooding you with adrenaline and cortisol to save your life. Meanwhile, it's just an email. So people listening, let's also think about the value of noticing it when it's happening, is so that we know we can kind of get back to that part of us that is creative, that is rational, that is organized, that is managed, rather than staying in that state. So dryness of mouth, or you actually maybe feel just
increased heart rate.
Faster heart rate, maybe
rapid breathing, like these are things like, I think you hit on some of the most important ones, which is the adrenaline, the cortisol, the heart rate, rapid breathing. I think there is something about, again, I think your senses are also really keen. So like to your point about the arm, someone crossing their arm in a meeting, and somehow you're stressed by that or triggered by that. I hate to use that word sometimes, but we have to use it. And then you start looking around the room to see if everybody else knows, or if, so your sense of alertness even goes up in your body. And to your point, the question is recognizing that is happening, right? Yeah. And so that you can get back to a place where you can have rational thought, that you can, lean into your decision-making capabilities and take control of the situation.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Because in those states, you're right. It's still, the brain is being very efficient. It's like quick, but it's not accurate. So that's when you could still say, yes, 5 people in the room look very annoyed. But that may not be accurate because your brain is just like, this kind of looks like a time when something very bad happened. So I'm trying to keep you safe here. But actually, someone else would say, well done. That was a beautiful presentation. Everybody really appreciated it. And you only just look at the 3 people who, I don't know, look slightly grumpy. So our brain is also then like keen senses, but inaccurate. So if we think about that as a leader, what does that mean then? If this is a sort of state of prolonged stress you're feeling, if you are experiencing this amygdala or this cortisol rush, if we stay in that state, it means that you're not actually able to make clear, as accurate as possible decisions and good, loving connections with others, because that's not a time to be creative or to be open or to relish some ambiguity or consider other options. No, it's like a quick, I need to nip this in the bud. I need to deal with it, or I've got nothing to say. I'm just going to shut down.
Right.
So
in your opinion, Dean, I was going to say, in your opinion, do you think that all stress is bad?
No, I don't think so. I think we actually need it. It's quite, if we think of it even from an evolutionary point of view, it's useful. It tells certain parts of our brain to focus. So there's actually, there's a nice piece of research done by a pair. Well, it was done early 1900s called Yerkes-Dodson. Yerkes is Yerkes. And they talk about the Yerkes-Dodson law. It illustrates the relationship between performance and stress. And what they found was there's an optimal point beyond which increased or prolonged stress actually negatively impacts performance. You can Google it and have a look. But this little graph looks like an upside down U. And if you imagine like on the x-axis, like the horizontal axis there, if that's stress going from 0 to extreme stress, and the vertical axis, the y-axis, is performance. If you think bottom left, that would be a task typically that's low stress, so doesn't matter, or it's really easy, or it's really boring, or there are no consequences. It's like whatever. What's your performance typically going to be of that? Kind of, all right. But as the consequences or the stress or that stimulus kind of increases, maybe there's a bit of a deadline, or it's with an important client, or it's for promotion, or, there's just something a little bit more riding on it. As that stress or stimulus increases, we see like a move across, that x-axis. So performance increases. The brain is like, oh, okay, I really got to put my energies into this. And right at the top of the U, that's the optimal point, maximum performance with just the right amount of stress. But beyond that, if I'm staying in that stress state, or as a leader, I'm keeping people like really like hammering, increasing, the risk or the perception of like, this is really important. If we fail, this is going to mean the end of our whatever. We actually see performance drop off. So we want to make sure our folk are not sitting in that low stress, like no consequences for their work. That means, they're not actually, they may be bored, disengaged. And on the far right-hand side there, we're going to see burnout, where people just cannot sustain that level of stress. It does something really bad to their body. Their cognitive functioning is now negatively impacted. Their memory starts to go. They're actually unable to focus on things. The performance is actually dropped. So there's no point in pushing that stress, continuing to heap the stress on the team, thinking, oh, this is going to keep them performing. So some stress is good. Keeps us paying attention. Too much?
What's a low stressor for you? Give me an example of a low stressor.
Like what? Something that's like super easy, even.
Well, you said something that's low stress. That's a word that I picked up in what you were saying. Sure. A lot of what you were saying. when I think about like myself, like what's a low stress, I have this thing about, I feel like I'm sharing so much on this one. But I have this thing about bread. I love bread. I love it. I think I can look at it and I can see how it tastes before I put it in my mouth. And if it's warm, put butter on it, I am in heaven. And I am one of those people who can sit there with a glass of wine and really amazing bread and all kinds of spreads, and I could be the happiest person in the world. Now, that doesn't sound like stress, right? Before I move into this bread fetish, I go through a moment of like, as soon as I finish this bread, it's going to be on my ass. And I'm going to have to spend, forever trying to get it off. And so there is a little life stress. I still make the choice to eat the bread or not to eat the bread. But there's a moment where I do go down this road of processing the impact of what could be a lifetime of losing weight to try to get rid of my bread thing or keep my bread under control. But I'm making light of it in the sense that there are things that we think about that are things that just make us think, right? I know when I experience this thing is going to happen, right? And so I have the ability to make a choice. And I think for me, when I think about low stress, I think it doesn't trigger all the things we've talked about. You don't get knocked off your center. You actually do have a moment of going, let me process the impact of this and make a choice as to whether or not I'm going to do something or not something.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I think we this is still our conversation in response to your question of, is all stress bad? And I'm like, no, we need stress or even a stimulus, just some kind of a external pressure even. So a low stress example for me might be just being given a task to do that is not hard or that doesn't feel important or that has no deadline or the consequences of it are success or failure is like, who cares? So then there's no stress with it. So what's the performance going to be? It could be like, I'll just do it. In a way, if I want to increase my own performance, or if a manager wants to think about how do I get the best out of somebody, you can even introduce what I would kind of call artificial stress, which is to say, if I'm giving something to somebody, something to do, and it's inconsequential, then I shouldn't give it to them in any case. They shouldn't be doing it. There's important stuff to do. Or at least if I'm tasking somebody with something, what's part of their job, how can I, through the way in which I'm communicating the vision, actually say, this is why it's so important. You being able to get this done by Friday means that our developers on Monday can blah, 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 blah. Or being able to do this really well. I know you can just bang it out in an hour, but if we can do something exceptional, this is what it's going to do for our clients. So you can see how I'm actually putting a little bit of a extra stimulus or stress so that that person can focus on that and go, okay, I'm not going to just bang out something in an hour. This will make a difference for our client, or this is an opportunity to rescue a project that's about to fail. Like, hey, the stakes are high here. And that means that person is still concentrating and they're still giving of their best. And that's what I want as a leader. I still want to be able to extract the best from them with just enough
stress. What would you say to someone who's trying to recognize if they are in stress? Like how do you recognize stress in yourself? And then more specifically, how do you recognize it in your team?
Yeah. I think the signs, because this is what's happening in the brain, and, the cortisol or the adrenaline can be flooding our body when we are having too many, consecutive episodes of this high stimulation of the amygdala, is that it shows up in our body physically. So it can be, maybe you don't normally have headaches and you're getting a lot of that. Maybe the way in which you normally sleep is being affected. Now you're sleeping super hard, or now there's insomnia, there's some shift there. Maybe heavy fatigue that just no amount of rest is seeming to, help you to recover. And then also irritability emotionally, just not being able to have the normal amounts of compassion or empathy you might have for people, or amount of time you might willingly want to give to somebody else. When you notice these shifts within yourself of, normally I would meet with my co-workers in that other department so we can share goals. Now I don't care about them. I've canceled those meetings. I've taken them off my calendar. Any sort of shift, I would say, is a time for us to really lean in and go, what's going on? Is it because I'm actually so burnt out and I'm staying in this high stress state that I'm not actually enjoying, don't have an positive experience of my work, and I'm not really wanting to connect with others. What do you think we should be looking out for in teams, Alison? Like if you're a leader, and how do we know if our teams are maybe experiencing burnout?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple more to yours.
Sure.
So I think you hit it. And the only thing I would add is to think about stress for those of us who like buckets, physical, emotional, or behavior, right? So, sometimes we think a headache is a headache is a headache, but actually a headache is a sign, right? Sometimes we think I'm irritated or I have anxiety, but we think it's about something about us, but actually something might be triggering that, right? And I think you hit the behavior part, which is avoidance or poor communication. And I really do think that avoidance one, I just want to double click on that because I do think, again, that goes back to the flight of just wanting to just sort of get away from it. In terms of team, I think it's interesting because I go back to the example that I used earlier. I noticed a shift in the dynamic of how people dealt with me and how they approached me because of how I demonstrated stress on the team. And they tend to stay away. They don't offer as many ideas as you would normally see them doing. Some of your top performers go quiet on you. Yes. I think mostly the thing that I think is really dangerous is they go quiet and they never come out. And most of that is because we're not recognizing that they have gone quiet in the first place. So I think there's the noticing of quiet. They're not bringing the great ideas towards you. They are not challenging anything when they normally do, and you offer that to them. There is a real shift in the energy of the team. And that's usually a sign that something is going on. And again, 99% of that is often how you are showing up with the team. Sometimes individuals obviously can be stressed, but if we're answering it on a team dynamic perspective, those are the things I look out for.
Yeah, those are good ones. And I would say there's also a very obvious one, which is perhaps there's a time when people actually come to you and say, I've got a lot on. I'm exhausted. My workload's heavy. Like, let's not, and you and I have spoken about this a lot on this podcast, Alison, probably like 20 times in 20 episodes, not to sort of poo-poo when somebody says, hey, I've got a bit, my workload's heavy. Not to be like, well, that's the way we work around here, or we've lost 3 members of our team, or that's, sure, whether that's what your organization, what the norm is or not, you have a choice as a leader. What are you going to do with that? Because somebody's still telling you that. So is there a chance for you to still say, hey, I acknowledge this with you. Thank you for coming to me. Let's have a look and see what is essential. What might I need to delegate? How can I help you understand what's important about this work? What else do you need? Rather than suck it up, buddy. Everybody's got a lot on. That's not compassionate. So to listen to that so that we don't then, like you said, start to lose our team and we're like, oh, they're not talking to us anymore. There's a change of dynamic. They probably told you at some point.
Yep.
I'm struggling.
Yep.
I've got a lot. What's important? Please help me in some way. Yeah.
That's a really good one. Good one. What are the methods, in your opinion, of like sort of mitigating it?
Yeah. I think there's some really good leadership practices that many of the, great leaders who are listening to this are doing already, which if we can make a link to why it's actually working from a brain science point of view, then we'll go, yeah, of course. One of the ways to mitigate stress in your team is to really appreciate that predictability is a great, or routine is a great way to reduce the likelihood of people going into that fight or flight, that amygdala activation. So wherever possible, and it doesn't mean boredom, it means predictability. Are you going to always be, what is your mood like? Can people expect you in a certain way? What is the way in which you approach project meetings or follow-ups or connecting with other people in teams? Like whatever that action is, let there be something that people can get used to rather than have to be on red alert. We don't know which version of my manager is coming in today, or used to do the project debrief like this, but every time there's some other thing. So predictability and using routines in a nice way actually reduces the risk of cortisol being flooded through your people and then them not being able to think. Another one that I really love is sort of celebrating wins and acknowledging what people have done well. And anyone listening here would say, like, yeah, sure, of course. From a brain point of view, what is that doing? That actually releases dopamine. When we have somebody say, yeah, you achieved your goal, or spot on, Alison, here are the 5 things you did that made that so powerful, and that, the piece of work you did, actually your brain produces dopamine, which is like that feel-good drug or hormone, which lowers cortisol in our bodies. So those are my two big favorites of things that leaders can be doing now, consciously going, oh, it's actually, I'm helping my people get into a good brain state rather than just, oh, here's a nice thing to do, important thing as a leader. Mm-hmm. Are there any things or tips that you would suggest or that you like, Alison?
I'll just go back to something we talk about all the time. Like, I'll use someone came to you, told you that they had a lot on, help me out. That is a strong demonstration of open communication channels. So I would say a lot of us don't sit in offices anymore, or don't sit physically in an office. We're in open plan offices, but that whole concept of open door policy is something that just really just needs to exist. People should be able to approach you when they have question, issue, curiosity about something. So creating those open communication channels are just important. I think encouraging work-life balance for yourself, but also and I know it's work-life integration, and there are all kinds of snazzy terms for it. The reality of the situation is feed your soul, do your job, take care of yourself physically, spiritually, whatever makes sense for you. Have that sort of nice combination of things that give you life. And I think the other is making sure that you're taking advantage of resources that your organization may have, or ones in which you can learn from us. Connect with people, get coaching, get ideas, think about leveraging wellness programs. And again, encouraging this for yourself, but encouraging this for your team.
Yeah. Beautiful. There's a goodie. So as we wrap up this session today, what I would love to ask leaders who are listening, please leave us a comment. I'd love to hear what's one action you can take this week to help your own brain recharge or get back online, or what's something that you can do to keep your team mentally sharp and engaged. So leave us a comment. As always, give us a follow. Please share this with people in your team. Share it with your manager, those you've worked with, past colleagues. #Leadership Rewired. We'd love to continue to build this community of leaders. And again, we're just so grateful that you are here and that you're committed to your growth and to being, to having a good experience for yourself as a leader, but also how are you showing up for your people so that you can help them be resilient and you can drive change and be successful in your organization. We really value you so much. Alison, anything from you, my friend?
No, I'll just close it out and say thank you for your thanks for this topic, Dean. I think it was really great. And I think the notion of managing stress is something we'll probably talk about a lot over the next, year or so, because it's needed. And leaders keep leading. You're in very tough positions. Often you're not the key decision maker, and you're the one that's having to carry out a decision that's been made, and you have to get people to lead, to engage, and you have to retain your top performers in the list, and. And so I would just say, it's not always easy to be a leader. And so just, lean on your resources, stay connected to Dean and I. We appreciate any feedback that we get on this podcast, and we're going to continue to focus on it. And so follow us, obviously subscribe, but more importantly, connect to the next podcast coming right after this, as Dean mentioned, which will be on a little conversation around ADHD and leadership, and how these two can actually come together and are together and can be leveraged for strong leadership. So looking forward to continuing the conversation. So thank you so much.
Indeed. Thanks, Alison. Thanks, everyone.